Have you ever wondered if Imperium had not been greedy and proud, would Necron ever have awakened? It begins with a step, a small, careless step that seems harmless. But in the vast, silent tombs of dead worlds, even the slightest disturbance echoes across millennia. History is filled with such mistakes. Imperium believed itself wise, but in its hunger, in its arrogance, it touched what should have remained untouched. The tomb worlds slept, millions of years of silence, of metal and stars preserved in cold darkness. Necron did not seek to rise. Their eyes did not long for the sky. Yet Imperium's hand reached out. The Adeptus Mechanicus called it a relic of lost knowledge. Soldiers called it another scavenger mission. No one imagined the price. Tech Priest from Sanctuary 101 said, "I thought it was just another tomb. Just another world to strip of crystals and metals." But the ground trembled beneath our boots. I saw them awaken, eyes like blue fire. We were not ready. Even the smallest worlds hold dangers. The Adeptus Mechanicus, with all their sacred rites, believed themselves keepers of Imperium's glory. They sought artifacts, relics of power. What they found instead were warriors older than history itself, lying in silence, dreaming of vengeance. Imperium's pride was absolute. Every decision was cloaked in certainty. Every mission was a chance to prove dominion over the galaxy. Yet in that very certainty lay the seed of disaster. Tomb worlds were catalogued, worlds of silent kings untouched for eons, and still greed whispered. "There may be power, there may be glory," it said. And so they opened the doors. Survivor from Cadia said, "I remember the first strike. Bolter fire bounced off them. I aimed for a head and it was like shooting smoke. They walked forward, silent, relentless. I couldn't hear them breathe. I couldn't feel them falter. It was no longer legend. It was reality. Necron were awake and the galaxy would never be the same. Imperium faced a new enemy. One that did not tire. One that did not negotiate. One that did not forgive. The mistake was simple. Greed, pride, curiosity. In another life, in another choice, the mission might have returned empty-handed. Tomb worlds would have slept. Necron would have remained a ghost in the stars. Imperium might have had fewer enemies to face. Perhaps chaos would have been the only threat, the only shadow over its throne worlds. But those hands reached too far. Those minds sought too much. And in that instant, silence shattered. Tech Priest from Sanctuary 101 said, "We tried to fall back, but every corridor became a cage. Every shadow held movement. It was like walking through a nightmare sculpted in steel. And the blue eyes, I will never forget them." Even now, historians of Imperium avoid speaking of the first encounters. The tales are hushed, hidden beneath layers of doctrine and propaganda. Yet survivors know. They remember the trembling of stone, the hiss of metal joints, the unyielding march of warriors who had waited eons for this moment. Imagine the galaxy, calm and silent, the tomb worlds untouched. The great crusade pressing forward, fighting chaos, subduing rebellion, unchallenged by any Kharon. Imagine what might have been if greed had not won the day. The course of history could have shifted, lives spared, worlds unburned, futures preserved. But that is not the reality we have. The reality is cold, grim, and unforgiving. Imperium learned too late that some knowledge is not meant to be taken. Some doors are meant to stay closed. The tomb worlds stir. Blue eyes awaken in shadowed corridors, watching. Waiting. The galaxy does not yet know it, but the next great trial has begun. Imperium always believed it was the center of everything. Every star, every world, every life. Subordinate to its will. Pride was not a sin. It was law. Greed was not a flaw. It was strategy. In that certainty, they moved through the galaxy, touching worlds that should have remained untouched. Tomb worlds were a temptation no one could resist. Their silent mounds of metal, They're sleeping kings, secrets buried under eons of dust. The Adeptus Mechanicus called it research. Soldiers called it duty. But beneath it all there was hunger. Hunger for power, hunger for relics, hunger for glory. Imperium's arrogance was methodical. Every excavation, every mission, every step measured in terms of gain. Worlds were stripped for resources, tombs pried open under the guise of discovery. None questioned if they should stop. None questioned the consequences. A single tomb world on Cadia yielded crystals and metals beyond calculation. The Adeptus Mechanicus marveled at the relics. Machines hummed in approval. Yet in the air, a subtle tremor ran through the stone. The kings slept unaware of the intruders. Imperium's pride blinded them. Knowledge was pursued with zeal, wisdom ignored. The tomb worlds offered artifacts, yes, but they also offered a warning. And Imperium did not hear it. A veteran soldier whispered as the ground vibrated under their feet. "Something stirs below. We should not have come." Even high-ranking officers orbiting above failed to grasp the danger. Their reports spoke of success, efficiency, glory. Silence about hesitation or fear was the rule. That false confidence spread through the ranks like wildfire. The Adepta Sororitas divisions watched from the shadows of hive cities. Their prayers rose but remained powerless. They saw the digging, the uncovering, the reckless curiosity. Nothing they could do would stop what was coming. On Fenris, a squad uncovered a vault that had lain sealed for millions of years. Sparks from a lascannon flew against the tomb doors. For a moment everything froze. Silence. Then a tremor, subtle at first, then undeniable. The air itself seemed charged. One engine's ear spoke quietly, almost to himself. "We were intruders, and they are waking." Imperium marched on. The Great Crusade left no room for hesitation. Pride demanded progress. The living and the dead became indistinguishable in pursuit of relics. Every chest opened, every artifact removed was a step deeper into danger. The arrogance of Imperium was total. It believed it could take, consume, and control anything, living or dead. And in that belief it sowed the seeds of its own reckoning. On Armageddon, another tomb world yielded strange glyphs. The Adeptus Mechanicus deciphered what they could. The inscriptions were cold, mechanical, precise. No prayer, no ritual, no understanding could prepare them for the awakening they had provoked. A young soldier glanced at the tomb's massive doors, eyes wide. "We should leave now," he murmured. But the orders were clear. Seize the relics, complete the mission. Hesitation was not tolerated, and so the first threads of destiny twisted. Tomb worlds stirred. Necron, the undying kings, began to wake. Imperium pressed forward unaware. They thought themselves invincible. They thought themselves wise, and that thought would be their undoing. In the distance, a crystal hummed, a sound like metal grinding against itself. A tech priest's fingers hovered over the console. "The artifacts. They resist," he whispered, voice trembling. For a moment, even the most faithful wondered if they had gone too far. Imperium had reached too far. Their hands had taken what should not be taken. And in the silence that followed, the kings began to stir. Not with anger at first, but with the patient inevitability of eternity. Imperium's greed did not stop at one world. Tombs were catalogued, marked for future expeditions, and each team believed it would be the last to uncover secrets. But history has a way of repeating itself when arrogance goes unchecked. The Adeptus Mechanicus dispatched teams across multiple sectors. Their mission? Retrieve relics, assess technology, prove Imperium's dominion. They moved like shadowed priests of progress, confident in ritual and code, blind to the dangers beneath. On Macragge, an excavation team uncovered a sarcophagus larger than any cathedral. Symbols glimmered in the dim light. The soldiers marveled. "It's beautiful," muttered one, awe mingled with fear. The tech priest beside him adjusted the servos of his mechadendrites, murmuring a prayer. But the air itself seemed tense, electric, as if aware of their intrusion. A veteran engine seer whispered, "Do you feel it? The metal. It hums with intent." Imperium dismissed the sensation as a trick of machinery, a side effect of ancient engineering. They drilled deeper, stripped layers of protective metal, and removed the first artifacts. And with each item taken, a faint vibration pulsed through the stone. A whisper of movement echoed in the caverns below. On Nocturne, another tomb revealed massive war constructs, their limbs folded in rest. Soldiers aimed bolters, fearing an ambush from the living, unaware that the dormant could awaken with the wrong touch. A tech priest's fingers grazed the surface of a console, and sparks jumped, small but insistent. "This one resists," he murmured, voice tight with apprehension. It is not ready to be taken." But orders demanded results. Pride demanded relics. The tombs yielded treasures, and Imperium celebrated, blind to the warning signs. Every excavation, every artifact became another step toward awakening kings who had slumbered longer than history itself. A soldier on Armageddon felt a cold vibration through the floor. He froze. "Did you feel that?" he asked, voice low. His comrades laughed nervously, attributing it to machinery. But deep down, a primal fear gnawed. Even trained warriors could sense the wrongness. Imperium's mistakes compounded. One world led to another. Tombs previously untouched were breached. The adeptus mechanicus justified each act as progress, each artifact as proof of supremacy. Yet the subtle tremors grew stronger. Shadows moved where shadows should not be. A hum resonated in the air, quiet but unmistakable. The Armageddon excavation was particularly ominous. Massive sarcophagi lined the halls, etched with glyphs that even the most experienced tech priests struggled to read. A young apprentice stepped closer to one and felt the cold seep into his bones. It watches," he whispered, backing away. Imperium ignored the warnings. Success reports flooded the high command. Pride swallowed caution. Greed silenced doubt, and the kings waited, patient, eternal, their awakening inevitable. On Cadia, another team unearthed a crystalline weapon, ancient yet perfectly preserved. Sparks flew as the Lascanon tested it. A veteran soldier stepped back. "This shouldn't be here. It shouldn't exist," he muttered. But no one stopped. No one listened. The Great Crusade demanded victory, and curiosity demanded the artifacts. The Adeptus Mechanicus recorded data, cataloged materials, praised efficiency. No mention was made of tremors, vibrations, or the sense that the dead were watching. Silence was easier than admitting fear. Pride was easier than humility. And then came the first undeniable sign. A sarcophagus shifted. Just a millimeter, almost imperceptible. Sparks flew from contact points. Shadows stretched where no light reached. A lone tech priest froze, servos whirring, fingers hovering. "They move," he said softly. The words felt too small for the vastness of what was awakening. Imperium dismissed it as machinery settling, metal contracting after centuries of silence. But soldiers felt it. Unease, fear, instinctive knowledge that something ancient had noticed their intrusion. And though orders demanded they continue, the air seemed charged, waiting, alive. Every tomb world looted was another thread in a tapestry of error. Pride and greed were building the stage for a reckoning Imperium could not imagine. Necron did not yet strike, but they watched, patient and eternal, counting the days of intrusion. A survivor on Fenris whispered to his squad as they hauled artifacts to the surface. "We are taking what is not ours, and they will remember." Imperium had thought themselves masters of relics. They were not. They were intruders, awakening a wrath older than humanity, older than stars. Tomb worlds stirred, shadows lengthened. The faint hums of machinery resonated with a deeper, colder pulse. The dead had begun to stir. The consequences of Imperium's greed were not immediate, but they were inevitable. Tomb worlds that should have slept for millions of years began to stir. Necron kings, once silent and forgotten, felt the vibrations of intrusion, the touch of curious hands. Every artifact removed, every sarcophagus opened, was a step closer to awakening a force that knew nothing of mercy. Imperium continued its campaign as if nothing had changed. The Adeptus Mechanicus catalogued relics. Engineers celebrated efficiency. Soldiers carried treasures to orbit. Reports to high command spoke of success, of progress, of glory. None admitted the unease, the tremors, the subtle signs that their intrusions were being noted. On Macragge, a sarcophagus door shifted slightly. Sparks flew where Lescanons had hit the edges. Soldiers froze, their instincts screaming danger. One whispered, voice tight, "It knows we are here." But the command did not pause. Pride demanded results. Orders demanded action. Tombs were stripped further, deeper, with greater fervor. And the kings watched. A tech priest apprentice noted an unusual pattern in the glyphs etched along the sarcophagus. "These symbols, they are not decorative," he murmured to his mentor. "They respond to our presence." The elder brushed it off. "Distracted by data collection. We take what is offered. That is all that matters." On Fenris, another squad hauled a crystalline weapon to the surface. One soldier, feeling the weight not just physically but in his mind, muttered, "We carry their wrath with us." His comrades laughed nervously, but beneath the laughter was fear. The tombs were not meant to be disturbed. Imperium's hubris was total. It believed in dominion over life, over death, over the stars themselves. It had forgotten one essential truth. Some powers are eternal. Some kings do not forgive intrusion. Necron were patient, enduring, and now fully aware. The first tremors turned to vibrations. Shadows stretched unnaturally. Halls of metal groaned as sarcophagi shifted. A veteran soldier froze mid-step. "We should leave," he said, voice almost lost amidst the hum. But no one moved. Orders demanded progress. Curiosity demanded treasure. On Armageddon, the Adeptus Mechanicus debated the integrity of a sarcophagus that resisted every probe, every instrument. "It is sealed beyond our understanding," said one. The other shrugged. "Then we will break the seal. Progress waits for no one." They did not realize that the seal was the only thing holding back awakening. The slow, inexorable rise of Necron was unstoppable. Imperium had built the stage, laid out the pieces, and ignored every warning. Tomb worlds that had slept in perfect silence now resonated with life. The kings remembered, and the galaxy's ignorance made them unstoppable. A soldier glanced at the others as the ground quivered faintly beneath their feet. "Do you feel that?" He paused, then whispered, "We've done something terrible." Every excavation, every stolen artifact, every ignored tremor had consequences. Imperium's campaign of greed had created not glory, but a nightmare waiting patiently in the dark. Necron would rise, and the first encounters would be unlike anything they had ever faced. Even the Adeptas Sororitas sisters stationed in orbit or on nearby worlds sensed the imbalance. Their prayers, whispered in the void, could not halt the inevitable. The Great Crusade's reach had unknowingly triggered a reckoning millions of years in the making. And in the quiet moments when stars seemed still and machines hummed softly, the truth became undeniable. Imperium's hands had reached too far, taken what was not theirs, and awakened an enemy older than any record, more relentless than any legion, more unforgiving than any god. The tomb world stirred with anticipation, the kings awakening not in rage, but in measured patience. Necron remembered every intrusion, every violation, every theft, and they waited for the right moment to reclaim what had always been theirs. Imperium had reached too far, awakened an enemy older than any record. If they had stopped at the very beginning, would things have turned out differently? The air above the tomb world was thick with dust and silence. Even the stars seemed to hesitate, their light dim against the metallic horizon. Tremors ran through the ground, subtle at first, almost imperceptible. Then, with a clarity that made every soldier pause, the sarcophagi began to hum. The first awakening was slow. A metallic groan echoed through the vaults. Necron kings, vast and unyielding, stretched limbs folded for millions of years. Their eyes glowed faint green like distant suns caught in stone. The silence shattered with an unspoken threat. Time itself seemed to bend around the weight of their return. A tech priest on the surface whispered, voice trembling, They are stirring." His mechadendrites shivered in response to the vibrations. Sparks danced along metal, tracing the outlines of glyphs that had not been seen for eons. The Adeptus Mechanicus teams froze, unsure whether to continue extraction or retreat. Below in the caverns, a sarcophagus shuddered. A soldier raised his Lascanan hand, shaking. I can't believe they're alive," he muttered. Around him, shadows moved unnaturally, as if the darkness itself obeyed a command older than humanity. The awakening was not chaotic. It was deliberate, precise. Necron did not rush. They assessed, calculated, and prepared. Every motion had purpose, every step a threat. The ground trembled with their weight. Dust and debris shifted, falling like rain upon the intruders. In a distant hall, another sarcophagus cracked along its seam. Sparks shot outward as metal rubbed against metal. A veteran soldier staggered backward. They're not like anything we've fought before," he said, voice barely audible. Bolters rattled, but the sound seemed hollow. A tech priest leaned close to a console, trying to stabilize readings. Energy readings. Off the charts. Impossible. This should not be. He trailed off, eyes wide. His fingers twitched, adjusting instruments that could not measure the presence fully. Above ground, the first confrontation began. Necron warriors emerged, their movements silent, calculated, inhuman. Bolters spat fire, Lascanan screamed, but the shots passed through them as if through mist. Soldiers felt their courage falter, replaced by a primal fear no training could erase. One soldier shouted, "There!" but his words vanished in the resonance of metal stepping on stone. Necron did not hesitate. They advanced, their faces unyielding, eyes void of emotion. Every weapon fired seemed to amuse them, every strike futile. The tech priest attempted to counter with a grav gun, focusing energy, trying to create barriers. Sparks leapt, fields wavered, but the Necron moved through the waves effortlessly. Precision met inevitability. The human defenders realized too late that they were not facing beings. They were facing inevitability made flesh. A lone survivor on Macrag recounted later, "I fired my bolter, every shot, every burst, and it passed through them. They didn't flinch. I saw them silent, walking. No hate, no rage, just purpose." The air thickened. Dust hung like a shroud. Sparks danced from damaged tech. Every machine, every glyph, every crystal seemed to pulse with a rhythm dictated by the awakening kings. Soldiers found themselves disoriented, their training insufficient against the calculated precision of the Necron. The vaults themselves seemed to respond. Doors shifted, walls vibrated. Metal structures groaned, reacting as if aware of every step, every weapon. Necron walked through corridors that had remained sealed for millions of years, unhurried, patient. They did not need to rush. Imperium had already doomed themselves by intrusion. Above, the Adeptus Mechanicus called for retreat, but their voices were drowned in the resonance of awakening metal. The soldiers looked at each other wide-eyed. Some tried to fire, some froze. Chaos which they were trained to fight was familiar. This was different. This was calculated, inevitable, and devoid of emotion. In the deepest hall, a sarcophagus split entirely, releasing its occupant. Necron king, immense, limbs like forged metal, eyes burning faint green, stepped forward. The silence broke into a mechanical whisper, as if the entire tomb world exhaled. Soldiers felt the gravity of their error, but it was already too late. A tech priest muttered under his breath, "We have awakened them, and they remember every hand that touched these tombs." His voice faltered. He could not finish. Machines hummed, glyphs glowed, and the Necron moved with unstoppable intent. Bolter fire, Lascannon's plasma, all futile. The soldiers tried to regroup, forming lines, firing in desperation. Necron flowed through their positions. Every strike met no resistance, every defense shattered by inevitability. And above all, the silence returned. Not peaceful, not calm, an unbearable stillness thick with the knowledge that Imperium had overstepped. Necron did not celebrate victory. They did not revel in destruction. They simply advanced, reclaiming what had been theirs for eons. The first battle was brief, devastating, and utterly one-sided. Imperium forces fell back, leaving tomb worlds open, treasures scattered, and survivors carrying stories of beings who were neither alive nor dead, yet infinitely more terrifying than either. The tremors that had started subtly now became undeniable. Dust swirled violently through the corridors, and every metal surface seemed to hum with the weight of what had awakened. Necron kings advanced steadily, each step a reminder that time itself bowed to their patience. Imperium soldiers stumbled, bolters trembling in their hands. The realization hit them. This was no skirmish. They were facing inevitability incarnate. One soldier, gripping his Lascannon, muttered to his squad, voice raw, We can't stop them. Every shot, it's pointless." His comrades exchanged glances, the horror mirrored in every face. Training and discipline meant nothing against entities older than memory. Above ground, the Adeptus Mechanicus attempted to coordinate a defensive perimeter. Grav guns and plasma emitters flickered to life, but the readings were chaotic. The Necron moved with silent precision, flowing through the defenses like water through stone. Energy barriers shimmered and collapsed as if the laws of physics themselves had been rewritten. From a vantage point, a tech priest observed glyphs glowing in response to each human movement. They are adapting," he whispered, mechanical voice modulating in fear. "Every step we take, every weapon we fire, it is measured." His apprentice recoiled as sparks leapt from the console. They understood. Necron were not reacting. They had anticipated. In the corridors below, a squad tried to regroup. Lascannons spat beams of concentrated energy. Bolters cracked and roared. Necron brushed aside the attacks effortlessly, their movements precise, inexorable. One of the soldiers cried out, voice breaking, "They don't even feel it! None of it matters!" The Necron king that had emerged from the deepest sarcophagus paused briefly. Its green eyes scanned the vault, calculating, cold and implacable. The soldier who had shouted earlier fell silent, overwhelmed by the gaze. In that instant, fear became tangible, pressing down on every chest like lead. Sparks from damaged machinery fell like embers around them. Corridors twisted unnaturally as if the tomb world itself were responding to the awakening. Doors closed behind advancing Necron, cutting off any thought of retreat. Imperium forces found themselves trapped in a labyrinth that remembered every intrusion, every violation. A lone tech priest attempted a countermeasure, activating a grav gun field to slow their advance. Energy rippled outward, throwing Necron momentarily off rhythm. But the effect was minimal. They adjusted instantly, flowing around the field as if it were an obstacle in a dream. The soldier witnessing this gasped, "We're outclassed, outmatched, outlived." In a narrow hall, one Necron warrior paused and raised a crystalline blade. The soldier facing it fired his bolter point blank, bullets passing through like smoke. The warrior did not flinch, did not even glance. It stepped forward, closing the distance with precision no human could hope to match. Above the chaos, another tech priest tried to relay instructions, but the transmission scrambled. Necron interference, subtle yet pervasive, distorted every channel. Communications collapsed, leaving units isolated and alone. The soldiers understood then that they were on their own, facing entities whose strategy was written in patience, not passion. The battle moved through the vaults like a tide. Soldiers fired, retreated, regrouped, and fell again. Every corner held a threat that could not be reasoned with. Necron did not tire, did not panic, did not rage. They simply advanced. A sergeant shouted to his remaining men, "Hold the line! Hold it at all costs!" But his words were swallowed by the mechanical whisper of awakening tombs. Bolters rattled, plasma flared. But the Necron continued their silent march, a tide of inevitability pressing forward. One tech priest, cornered and desperate, muttered aloud, "They remember every hand that touched this place, every probe, every incision." Sparks leapt from his mechadendrites as he tried to stabilize readings. His voice faltered. The sheer weight of truth was unbearable. Finally, the first vault was lost. Necrons swept through, collecting nothing for themselves, leaving only devastation and silence in their wake. Imperium forces were scattered, survivors limping from the ruins, each carrying the memory of things they could not fully comprehend. The awakening was complete in this section of the tomb world. Necron paused, surveying their domain, eyes glowing faint green. Every human weapon had been tested, every tactic measured, every intrusion accounted for. The soldiers understood a grim fact. This was just the beginning. Above, the Adeptus Mechanicus observed the aftermath. Their data was useless, their weapons ineffective. Only one truth remained. The Necron had returned, and the Imperium had no plan to stop them. The corridors were littered with debris. Bolts, shattered lascannons, and scorched armor marked the path of the fallen. Necron had moved through methodically, leaving no resistance, only silence and devastation. Every soldier still standing felt the weight of inevitability pressing down. A lone survivor crouched behind a fractured wall, gripping a grav gun. Sparks leapt from damaged circuits nearby. He whispered to himself, voice trembling, They are unstoppable. Nothing we do matters." Above ground, the Adeptus Mechanicus surveyed the ruin. Instruments flickered erratically. Every reading was abnormal. A tech priest muttered, almost inaudibly, "The tomb world itself obeys them, every structure, every glyph, alive." The surviving soldiers tried to regroup, but the vaults offered no sanctuary. Necron moved silently, methodically, reclaiming corridors without haste. Their green eyes glowed in the shadows, unfeeling, unhurried, implacable. Fear settled deep into every chest, heavier than any weapon. One soldier raised his lascannon for one last desperate volley. The bullets passed through Necron like mist. He lowered his weapon, trembling. Around him, comrades fell back, retreating into the dim tunnels. Every hope of victory had dissolved into stark, mechanical reality. The kings paused briefly in the largest hall, surveying the devastation. They did not celebrate. They did not strike in anger. They simply acknowledged the intruders and the intrusion. Time had been broken, patience rewarded, and the intruders found utterly powerless. A tech priest, barely surviving in the rubble, scribbled hastily into a data log. "All efforts futile. They are not alive in any sense we understand. Yet they move, they judge, they reclaim." Sparks from his mechadendrites flickered erratically, echoing the tremors through the vaults. And then silence. Not calm, not peace. An oppressive stillness, thick with inevitability. Necron had claimed this part of the tomb world. The survivors, broken and disoriented, understood they had seen something older than the Imperium itself. Something patient, remorseless, and utterly unstoppable. Imperium forces withdrew, retreating to nearby worlds to regroup. Every mind carried the same realization. Necron had returned, and nothing could reverse what had been awakened. As dust settled and the echoes of bolter fire faded, a single thought lingered among the survivors, unspoken yet undeniable. If Imperium had stopped at the very beginning, would things have turned out differently? The tomb worlds remained silent but alert. Necron watched and waited. The Imperium had been warned, but history would not pause. And in that quiet, the galaxy held its breath for what would come next. After witnessing the devastation Necron could unleash, one could imagine what might have been. But in this alternate reality, the tomb worlds remained untouched. No tremor shook the ground. No green eyes glowed in the shadows. Sarcophagi lay silent, patient and unbroken, their kings still in eternal slumber. The corridors that had become death traps in another timeline were now empty, cold metal stretching beneath indifferent stars. Imperium forces, untested by ancient kings, focused on threats they could comprehend. Bolters roared against chaos cults. Plasma fire lit the skies against Tyranid incursions, and orcs were met with disciplined volleys. Ships launched across war-torn sectors, squads deployed with precision, and the Adeptus Mechanicus recorded relics already understood. None dared to touch the tomb worlds. The galaxy remained in fragile equilibrium. On Macragge, a tech priest traced glyphs along a sealed sarcophagus, careful not to disturb it. His apprentice watched, awed. "They sleep," he whispered, "and perhaps they will sleep for millions more years." The silence of untouched tombs was heavy but comforting, a stark contrast to the screams that had echoed in the other timeline. In orbit, Astra Militarum fleets coordinated campaigns across sectors scarred by war. Soldiers trained, generals strategized, and leaders plotted victories against known enemies. Here, the absence of any Necron allowed tactics to matter, preparation to have weight, and sacrifice to carry meaning. Even on Fenris, where orc raids tested the space wolves, victories were hard-won but survivable. Reports of skirmishes brought tension, but hope remained. Soldiers felt the weight of the galaxy, yet it was a burden that could be met with courage and skill, not the crushing inevitability of ancient kings awakened. A lone Inquisition agent on Nocturne scanned intelligence reports, unaware of the silent tomb worlds below. "We can contain what is known," she said, voice firm. Necron were a distant thought, a possibility ignored. Preparation and strategy defined every decision. Armageddon, endlessly scarred by war, felt different in this timeline. Soldiers fell, but their deaths could change the tide of battle elsewhere. The absence of any Necron gave Imperium a margin, a breathing space. Mortality remained tragic but manageable. Losses could be studied, learned from, and perhaps prevented in future encounters. The Adeptus Mechanicus catalogued and reported, their efforts unthreatened by the king's gaze. Machines hummed, factories produced, and weapons functioned. Every world, every squad, every plan operated under rules that humanity could understand. Nothing moved that could not be met, nothing struck that could not be defended against. In distant sectors, soldiers whispered to one another, unaware of the tomb world's potential. "We can handle this," one said, bolter in hand. Confidence remained. Hope persisted. They trained, fought, and endured, all without the shadow of Necron. Yet in the silence of the untouched tomb worlds, patience lingered. Necron kings slept, their slumber a silent guarantee that Imperium's efforts would not yet face the ultimate test. The difference between this timeline and the one that had unfolded was invisible but immense. Survival, strategy, and triumph were still possible. And in that quiet, a thought echoed through the minds of those reflecting on history. If greed had been restrained, if curiosity had not awakened the kings, what could the Imperium have achieved? The potential stretched endlessly, untested and preserved, waiting for the trials of the universe. With the tomb worlds untouched, Imperium could finally concentrate its strength on the threats it understood. Fleets of Astra Militarum vessels moved in precise formations, bolters and plasma guns primed against the familiar enemy lines. Chaos cults, tyrannid swarms, orc raiders, all faced the full might of disciplined strategy, coordinated command, and human determination. On Fenris, space wolves patrolled borders with enhanced vigilance. The absence of Necron meant every plan could be executed with confidence. Soldiers studied the enemy, adapted to their tactics, and learned from each encounter. Each victory built momentum, morale, and experience. Losses were tragic but expected, and survival carried meaning. In orbit above Armageddon, a tech priest monitored weapon output, the glow of energy fields reflecting off polished servitors. "Our defenses are holding," he reported, voice steady but tinged with relief. "Without the kings to contend with, we can deploy every asset efficiently, every ship, every squad, optimized." The Imperium's leaders, for once, were not reacting to inevitability. Strategies could evolve, contingencies could be tested, and the outcomes of battles were not predetermined by forces older than memory. Commanders plotted campaigns, learned from skirmishes, and refined tactics without the looming shadow of the unstoppable Necron. In one sector, a regiment faced a massive tyrannid advance. Bolters thundered, plasma flashed, and coordinated volleys decimated the swarms. Soldiers communicated effectively, adapting to each shift in the enemy's strategy. Victory was possible. Survival was tangible. Hope, fragile but present, threaded through every squad. A lone Inquisition agent observed from above, recording data for future campaigns. "We can study, predict, and counter," she murmured. Her words held weight because the universe had allowed it. The margin for error existed. The absence of the Necron meant that human ingenuity still mattered. Every plan had value, every life a potential impact. On Macragge, tech priests refined war machines without fear of them being immediately rendered useless by ancient kings awakening. Grav guns and bolters were tested, improved, and deployed efficiently. Lessons were learned and implemented swiftly. Progress, slow but meaningful, continued without the shadow of inevitability. Even on Catachan, where jungle warfare tore at squads, soldiers felt that each step, each strategy, each decision carried weight. They were tested, yes, but not doomed. Every victory built upon the last, and every loss was measured, not fatal. The galaxy, while grim, still allowed humanity agency. A sergeant on Nocturne reported, "We're making progress. Every engagement teaches us something new. Without the Necron looming over every tomb world, we can fight, adapt, and survive." Confidence spread like cautious sunlight among weary troops. And yet, awareness of what could have been lingered in whispers among historians and strategists. The dormant tomb worlds represented a potential threat, a patience that outlasted empires. They were reminders that humanity's victories were hard-won and contingent. Every gain carried the subtle weight of a future challenge waiting quietly beneath unbroken sarcophagi. In this timeline, Imperium thrived differently. The horrors of Necron did not define their campaigns. Soldiers could focus, commanders could plan, and civilizations could endure. The galaxy remained in balance, fragile but persistent. Every victory, every strategic triumph was amplified by the absence of an enemy older than memory. The Adeptus Mechanicus documented all, knowing that efficiency, preparation, and foresight mattered more than sheer luck. Technology could be deployed fully. Fleets moved without hesitation. Regiments engaged without the looming inevitability of immortal kings in green light, and for once human effort could make a difference. The galaxy, while still grim and unforgiving, breathed a little easier. Imperium could fight, lose, adapt, and survive. They were tested by chaos, orcs, and tyrannids, but none of these threats carried the inescapable certainty that an awakened Necron would have imposed. And in quiet contemplation, leaders, soldiers, and chroniclers alike understood the weight of restraint. Had hubris been tempered, Had curiosity not disturbed the tomb worlds, Imperium might have had years, decades even, to strengthen, endure, and define the course of history in ways now only imagined. The galaxy remained tense, though for now the tomb worlds slept. Imperium forces had survived, adapted, and even thrived in ways that would have been impossible if any Necron had awakened. Soldiers returned from campaigns battered but alive. Commanders reviewed strategies, adjusting formations and tactics with lessons learned. Even in sectors plagued by chaos cults, orc raids, or tyrannid swarms, victories now carried weight. Losses were tragic but meaningful. Each life, each squad, each regiment contributed to a broader plan. Imperium's focus had sharpened, not scattered by a threat beyond comprehension. Historians, chroniclers, and tech priests quietly noted the stark difference between this timeline and the one that might have been. The tomb worlds remained untouched. Necron kings lay dormant, their patience infinite. The margin for human agency was real, tangible, and vital. On Fenris, space wolves held the line against marauding orcs. Each maneuver, each coordinated volley worked because they faced known enemies. Soldiers moved with confidence. Their losses were calculable, their strategies adaptable. Victory, while never guaranteed, felt possible. In orbit above Macragge, a tech priest reviewed fleet deployments. Grav guns hummed, bolters were primed, and supply lines ran uninterrupted. Efficiency and preparation mattered. No Necron king had emerged to nullify their efforts. No ancient hand had rewritten the rules of engagement. For the first time, human ingenuity carried its full weight. A lone Inquisition agent reflected on what this restraint had allowed. "We can study, predict, and counter," she mused. In this timeline, preparation meant something. Decisions mattered. Plans could unfold without the shadow of inevitability lurking behind every doorway. Even on Armageddon, where battles raged endlessly, the difference was clear. Soldiers could fall, regiments could be shattered, but the absence of Necron ensured that human effort had meaning. Sacrifice could shape outcomes. Mortality remained tragic but survivable. Strategy had teeth. And yet the silent tomb worlds reminded those who pondered them. Restraint was fragile. Curiosity or hubris could awaken kings that waited patiently beneath metal and stone. The potential for disaster was immense, invisible until the moment it struck. Every victory carried with it the quiet weight of what could have been, an enemy older than memory, patient and inevitable. Imperium leaders understood this. The galaxy was safer, yes, but only because the ancient kings had not been disturbed. A question lingered in their minds, whispered in quiet halls, across command decks, and in the notes of chroniclers. If the tomb worlds had remained untouched, could Imperium endure longer? Could they have reshaped the galaxy without the shadow of Necron looming over every plan, every campaign, every life? Across sectors, soldiers and commanders alike felt the subtle difference. Battles were survivable. Losses could be studied and learned from. Plans could succeed. Humanity's agency was intact, fragile but real. They fought with skill, determination, and hope. Yet, for all the victories, there remained a quiet, unspoken understanding. The galaxy's balance was precarious. Tomb worlds slept, yes, but the potential for awakening was never gone. History had granted Imperium a reprieve, a chance to act without facing the inevitability of ancient kings. But restraint was required, vigilance demanded, and hubris punished swiftly in the Grimdark universe. As records were logged, fleets repositioned, and soldiers rested, one thought persisted, haunting the minds of those who reflected on the difference between timelines. How long could this fragile advantage last? How many tomb worlds remained untouched, patient and silent? And when they eventually stir, what price would humanity pay? The galaxy held its breath. Imperium had survived another cycle of conflict, strengthened by absence rather than confrontation. Battles were won, strategies tested, and victories meaningful. But the tomb worlds waited. Necron kings slept, patient beyond reckoning, a reminder that history was never fully in humanity's control. In the quiet, one question echoed across time and space. If the Imperium had learned restraint, could they have endured longer? Could hubris have been tempered, curiosity restrained, and the galaxy shaped without awakening the inevitable? And in that question lay the seed of the next story, the next lesson, the next challenge. The tomb worlds slumbered, but their time was coming. The tomb worlds had been disturbed. Necron kings now moved with precision, patience, and inexorable will. The galaxy trembled under their presence. Imperium forces, stretched thin from years of fighting chaos, orcs, and tyranids, now faced a threat that knew no hesitation, no fear, and no mercy. Worlds fell swiftly, cities burned under unrelenting green fire. Bolters tore through stone, yet often struck nothing, passing through immortal warriors as if they were shadows. Soldiers and regiments vanished, leaving only scorched ruins in their wake. Necron advanced methodically, claiming territory with the cold efficiency of machines older than humanity itself. Even on Macragge, home of disciplined ultramarines, the effects were devastating. Fleets that once coordinated flawlessly now struggled to adapt. Every tactic, every strategy was challenged by an enemy that refused to act unpredictably. Necron were precise, their patience unmatched, their wrath inevitable. A tech priest recording battlefield data spoke softly to himself, almost in disbelief. They do not tire, they do not falter, every strike, every step calculated. Sparks from servitors reflected in his mechanical eyes, echoing the tremors of Necron movement. Beneath the silence of a shattered cathedral on Armageddon, a squad of Astra Militarum tried to regroup. "We can't hold them," one whispered. His voice was swallowed by the roar of falling stone and the distant hum of grav guns. "We're expendable." Survival was no longer guaranteed. Hope was fragile, almost non-existent. On Terra, the Adeptus Mechanicus documented what remained of lost worlds. The Imperium's archives now held records of devastation that no strategist could have anticipated. Lessons were written in fire and ruin. Every tomb world touched by human hands had become a theater of annihilation. Necron did not celebrate. They did not rage. They moved as if the universe had waited for them, and now the pause had ended. The Imperium could feel the weight of inevitability pressing on every decision. Even the most skilled generals found themselves reacting rather than acting, the initiative slipping like sand through fingers. In orbit above Fenris, space wolves watched devastation unfold below. Bolters fired, plasma ignited, yet victory was fleeting. Soldiers fell, regiments scattered, and morale wavered. The ancient king's patience outlasted every human effort. Every measured strike by the Imperium was countered with mechanical precision. A lone Inquisition agent scribbled reports into a data log, voice tight with tension. Every tomb world touched, every mistake counted. We have learned nothing from restraint alone. Greed has awakened kings older than memory. Her words hung in the air, heavy with grim realization. Even worlds untouched by any Necron trembled with fear. The knowledge of their existence, the certainty of their return, reshaped strategy, politics, and daily life. Every commander, soldier, and tech priest understood that humanity's dominion was fragile. Preparation and courage mattered, but sometimes they were not enough. The galaxy's balance had shifted. Necron were no longer dormant. They were an unstoppable force, their inevitability rewriting history. Imperium forces scrambled to respond, yet every battle carried the weight of accumulated errors. Every lost world reminded them that in the Grimdark universe, ambition and curiosity demanded a price. And in quiet reflection, leaders and survivors alike began to ask, was the Imperium ever truly strong, or had it only survived because certain enemies had remained asleep? The answer was neither comforting nor clear. Strength now came at the cost of countless worlds and lives, and the price would only rise with time. Even as strategies were revised and forces redeployed, one lesson echoed above all. In the Grimdark universe, ambition without caution leads only to disaster. Every tomb world touched by human hands carried consequences that could not be undone. Every mistake, no matter how small, had awakened forces older than memory, patient beyond comprehension, and utterly unrelenting. The galaxy shivered beneath Necron advance. Imperium forces, battle-hardened yet exhausted, faced the terrifying reality of their own hubris. Lessons were learned in fire and loss, written in blood and steel. And the question that haunted every leader, every soldier, every chronicler remained: how many tomb worlds remain untouched, and how long before their silence breaks? The galaxy was a scarred mosaic of fire and ruin. Tomb worlds once untouched had become epicenters of annihilation. Necron moved with methodical precision, sweeping across worlds like a tide no human force could resist. Every planet touched bore the weight of the Imperium's greed. Every sarcophagus opened had written a new chapter of death. Even the most fortified worlds like Macragge and Armageddon felt the pressure. Bolters and plasma fire lit the night skies, but their impact was minimal. Grav guns hammered against metal forms that did not falter, and every regiment learned the same brutal lesson. Mortality had lost meaning in the face of immortality. A Space Wolves captain watched the battlefield from orbit, voice tight with disbelief. "Our soldiers fall, and yet they do not stop," he muttered. Every move was precise, deliberate. There was no fury, no emotion, only relentless inevitability. The enemy did not tire. The enemy did not fear. And humanity's victories were fleeting. On Terra, the Adeptus Mechanicus recorded devastation with mechanical detachment, each note a chronicle of hubris. Factories burned, servitors destroyed, and weapons caches emptied in the blink of an eye. Their data told only one story. The Imperium had awakened a force older than memory, and nothing short of unimaginable effort could halt it. Across the galaxy, soldiers whispered among themselves, haunted by the same thought. The price of curiosity and ambition was unimaginable. Every tomb world touched had become a tomb for those who dared to explore. The Grimdark universe offered no forgiveness, no second chances. Every mistake, however small, compounded into catastrophe. Even worlds that had been spared for the moment quivered with anxiety. The shadow of Necron was inescapable. Political leaders convened councils. Generals debated strategies, and tech priests recalibrated weapons. Yet the lessons were cruel. No plan could account for an enemy that did not sleep, did not hesitate, and did not forgive. A lone Inquisition agent on Nocturne wrote in her data logs, "Greed awakened kings older than memory. The cost is beyond calculation. The galaxy bleeds, and we are powerless to stem the tide." Her words were a testament to the grimdark truth. Ambition without restraint guarantees tragedy. Even with fleets arrayed, regiments reinforced, and strategies revised, the Imperium could only delay what was inevitable. Tomb worlds had been touched, and every misstep in their exploration unleashed consequences that rippled across systems. Necron were relentless, precise, and patient, leaving humanity little room to adapt. On Cadia, where defenses had once been legendary, the Necron advance dismantled fortifications with clinical efficiency. Bolters tore through walls that might have stopped orcs or tyrannids, yet fell short. Every defensive line, every tactical maneuver had to be recalculated in real time. Victory was fleeting, and losses came in waves too fast to tally. The grim lesson echoed across the galaxy. In the Grimdark universe, restraint is survival, and ambition carries death. Every tomb world touched became a monument to human hubris, a warning etched in stone and metal. Leaders understood the cost, soldiers bore the weight, and chroniclers wrote of the inevitability that followed curiosity. Even in the shadows, the Necron waited, observing, calculating, and advancing. They did not celebrate or rage. They existed beyond such human notions. And with each passing moment, humanity realized the truth. The Imperium's strength was conditional, fragile, and dependent on the sleep of ancient kings. Historians and strategists asked the question that haunted every soul. Had the Imperium ever truly been strong, or had survival been granted only because certain enemies remained dormant? The answer was as cold as the Necron metal, as unyielding as their advance. Strength was illusion, survival was a fragile gift, bought with restraint humanity had failed to exercise. And yet, from the ashes, lessons emerged. Preparation mattered, strategy mattered, and even in the face of inevitability, courage retained meaning. Every battle, every loss, every fleeting victory reinforced the harsh truths of the Grimdark universe. Ambition and curiosity carried consequence. Patience and restraint might have preserved more than a few worlds. The galaxy shivered under Necron advance. Imperium forces, exhausted yet determined, faced a stark realization. Every tomb world touched had shifted history, and no victory could erase the cost. The Grimdark universe reminded all who survived that hubris was punished, and the price of curiosity was death multiplied across worlds. In quiet reflection, one thought persisted across sectors, fleets, and chronicles. How many tomb worlds remain untouched, waiting for human hands, and when they stir, what will be left of the Imperium? The universe, grim and unforgiving, held its breath. Humanity had glimpsed what restraint might have preserved, and yet learned the lesson too late. Necron kings moved, patient and inevitable, rewriting history with every step, every pulse, every flicker of green light. The tomb worlds had awakened. Necron kings, patient beyond measure, now walked the galaxy with inexorable intent. Imperium forces, stretched, battered, and exhausted, faced the consequences of curiosity and ambition. Worlds burned, regiments vanished. Strategies failed against immortality incarnate. Even as leaders and survivors surveyed the ruins, one thought persisted. This was not merely an enemy, it was a mirror of hubris. Every tomb world disturbed was a lesson. Every life lost a reminder that restraint might have preserved more than just worlds. It might have preserved hope. The cost was undeniable. Cities lay in ruins. Fleets staggered under relentless assaults. Bolters, plasma guns, and grav weapons tore through the air, yet the Necron advanced, methodical, unfeeling, inevitable. Victory was fleeting. Survival was fragile. Humanity's dominion was conditional, contingent, and precarious. In quiet corridors of command, tech priests recorded what remained of industrial complexes, while strategists reviewed maps of lost systems. "Every tomb world touched," whispered one, voice tight with dread. The gravity of their missteps pressed down like the weight of a collapsing star. The Imperium had awakened kings older than memory, and there was no undoing what had been done. Yet in the Grimdark universe, lessons linger even in ruin. The Imperium's mistakes had shown the price of ambition unchecked, the cost of curiosity untempered. Patience, restraint, and careful calculation were virtues rarely exercised, but now they were understood in fire, blood, and metal. Every survivor carried these lessons forward, even as hope flickered against overwhelming odds. The universe waited. Tomb worlds untouched remained, patient and silent. How many, no one knew. How long before the slumbering kings stirred again? Impossible to predict, impossible to halt. Humanity's future, already precarious, balanced on the edge of ancient patience. Leaders asked themselves quietly, painfully, had the Imperium ever truly been strong, or had survival been granted only because certain enemies slept? The answer was uncomfortable, undeniable, and grim. Strength had always been conditional, survival a tenuous gift that demanded vigilance beyond comprehension. Across battle-scarred sectors, soldiers, tech priests, and strategists alike felt the weight of inevitability. They had glimpsed what restraint could have preserved. They had learned too late that ambition without caution only led to catastrophe. The galaxy, vast and indifferent, offered no second chances. Every tomb world disturbed had altered history in ways that could never be undone. And yet, in the darkness, another thought stirred. Beyond the kings, beyond the tomb worlds, there were whispers of greater powers. The Citan, once shattered, imprisoned and forgotten, waited for their chance. Their shards lingered across the stars, dormant yet not defeated, patient and cunning. Every Necron king awakened brought them closer to their return, every misstep by humanity nudging the universe toward another reckoning. Across sectors, fleets, and chronicles, one thought echoed. How many tomb worlds remain untouched? How long before they stir? And when the Citan, those once godlike shards of power, finally rise, who will survive to witness their awakening? The galaxy held its breath. Imperium forces clung to survival, aware that their dominion was never guaranteed. Tomb worlds had been touched, kings had awakened, and the consequences were etched in steel, stone, and blood. Humanity endured, but the lesson was clear. Ambition and curiosity carried the heaviest price. The story of Necron was not over. It was only beginning. And beyond their awakening, other ancient powers lingered, waiting. The galaxy would never be the same again.